Well, that was a frustrating mess up. For some reason, it used to be. I mean, as you can see, it's supposed to be able to just play here while I'm on the PowerPoint, and now that's not working the way it used to. So who knows what sort of technological shenanigans are going on? We can blame it on elves or goblins if we want to, but anyways. So the Ludlow massacre, I think, speaks for itself, but as something that wasn't just a rare occurrence, is what they were really articulating in the documentary. And so I don't know if many of you have been aware just how violent the labor struggles have been in the United States. And of course, you will read other accounts that portray the strikers in a much more violent light. That some would still argue that there was a valid reason for the law to come in with guns. And I'm only pointing this out is it's always fair to bring up that there's two sides of the story. You'll have to decide if this is a concern to you of who makes a stronger case for what. Okay, so moving on from there, we are going to go into a better discussion, and I'll have you watch another documentary clip on the issue of child labor and conditions like this young man due to what was taking place in factories with children. Now, just to briefly kind of go over some of the things that are talked about in this section. So, switching gears a little bit. As you saw in the textbook, there was a debate about bakers working long hours in hot, poorly ventilated kitchens, sleeping and washing where they actually baked their bread. And that there was a New York state law that passed to create better standards and sanitation standards for bakers, limiting them to 10 hours of work per day, 60 hours a week. Limiting. I want you to think about that. No, really think about that. There was a law about limiting people to only basically 60 hours a week as opposed to more. Now, in the situation, there was a case for where a bakery owner claimed that the regulations infringed his property rights. Okay, so what happened? So, well, first of all, there were different debates about worker safety and the rights of the law. Actually, I'm going to move on here. So, what was the decision? The regulations exceeded the state's constitutional powers. The court cited the 14th Amendment that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So what were the consequences of this? This curtailed progressives' attempt to transform the workplace, set off the Lochner era, as it was known in labor history, 32 years in which courts repeatedly struck down wage and working condition regulations. So, again, I just want to briefly say, think about the way that those in power and law, and even within the elites, were having debates about what was the role of government to do in regards to these working conditions. And there was not a unified set of ideas. So I guess what I want to also just kind of always remind us, that just as working America had all these different approaches that they could take to their conditions, whether it just be to obey the law and your boss and work, join a union. If I'm joining a union, do I join a more moderate one, or what about the wobblies, the anarchists, the socialists, the communists, or Eugene Debs running a platform? The upper class were also taking on different approaches. Do we keep sending in the guns and the heavy hands of the law? Does the law stay on the side of property rights, or do we need to make some compromises? Are we worried about a revolution? Do we prevent that from happening by giving more rights, or do we prevent that from happening by cracking down? Right? Okay. So these are some of the debates. Now, so just as I was mentioning, there was a whole debate: should government limit work hours or set a minimum wage by law? Okay, right? So, uh, it asks the question, why did the campaign for maximum work hour law succeed for women but fail for men? Well, here was one example. So there's Mueller versus Oregon. The Supreme Court upheld maximum hour laws for female workers because protecting women's reproductive health served the public good. So if you read this, for many women, I think now it's fair to say that most people would see this as the most sexist approach to a law. That why women were given reduced hours that they could be worked is because political leaders felt that women's reproductive health to make babies for our nation was just as important, and that women had to be able to basically get pregnant and have babies, and working that hard may, I don't know, have self-induced abortions through exhaustion or something. I'm not quite clear exactly how they were approaching this, but it was clear that they felt that women need to be able to work hard in the workplace, but also be able to make babies, and that it would be complicated by letting an employer make them work as many hours as possible. Okay, so this is the kind of mentality about things that was going on at the time. And if you read the textbook, though, what was this businessman's approach to it? Well, when the women finally were allowed to have more sane, what we would think, working hours, he fired them all and employed Chinese men that he could basically overwork. Okay, and so this then goes back to that whole thing, which is, many businesses here can no longer do what they used to be able to do here, and they move their businesses overseas. Are we, the argument that some people make is, well, hey, look, these women wanted the job, they had it, they're the ones that wanted to play that game, and so, the employer's going to do what he needs to take care of his own self-interests. I mean, this is what Karl Marx was talking about. Karl Marx felt that there was no way that an employer, a capitalist, and a worker could ever be at peace because their interests are diametrically opposed. They have class conflict of interests, okay? And so for Karl Marx, this would have been seen as inevitable, and this is where the communists would have been pointing this out and saying, oh yeah, look, the capitalists just can't compromise. But in fact, we did see later on businesses decide to compromise. Now, I'm not actually promoting Marxism or actually critiquing it. I'm merely pointing out this is the kind of things that would have been, if you were a worker, you might have been hearing from some activist on the side, okay? Now, moving on, there were other roles of women in activism, and this woman was a very interesting person, right? Carry a Nation, even her name I thought is awesome. Carry a Nation, wow. It's like kind of, pardon my expression, badass. Anyhow, as much as I like to drink, and I don't think that saloons are the worst things in the world, there's this thing, I kind of have like this admiration. She kind of makes my heart flutter. I mean, what an intense and passionate woman. She saw the fact, I mean, let's be honest though, abuse of alcohol in its ugliest form is pretty ugly. And for a lot of women, they were getting abused. Imagine the family's already working very hard, unlimited funds, and then the husband is going out to drink with the guys, not coming home, spending the little money they have on alcohol, and possibly even going to a prostitute, spending their hard-earned money on that. And these are the kind of things that many women were upset about. And there was also, despite the fact in the New Testament that Jesus' first miracle is to turn water into wine, many Christians started to argue, especially Protestant and evangelicals, and some still do, that it was grape juice and that alcohol isn't something that a Christian could have. So for Catholics, this is a part of your ritual, right? To have the communion. And not just Catholics, many other churches, that you pass the wafer and the wine. But I mean, my grandfather was one of those who believed that it was wrong. And I remember I said to him, grandfather, didn't the first miracle that Jesus do turn water to wine? He said, it's grape juice. And I said, Grandpa, is there really grape juice at a wedding, in a Jewish wedding, with grape juice like as a party drink? And oh, he got so mad at me, and he said, "You're gonna read." I miss my grandpa. Anyways, may he rest in peace. But he said, "You're gonna listen to this lecture by Pastor so and so," and we never got to that far. But my point is that he had very passionate views, such as she did. And what did she do? She smashed up saloons and broke things. I mean, wow. And you can see that there are many strong women in this time period that reacted quite intensely to issues that bothered them. Now, what was one of the reasons that she acted this passionately? She has a quote that I thought was really appropriate to this time period. She said, "You refused me the vote, and I had to use a rock." Okay? And I think this is again what progressives were kind of saying, which is that if we don't work things out legally and we don't create some equilibrium on things, then people are going to start smashing things up, right? And what ends up happening is that this movement gains a lot of momentum to create prohibition. We know, though, that ultimately doesn't work, and we'll cover that more later, but this did create a kind of pattern to crack down on alcohol use in America. And many of the progressives saw the problem that it created for the working class, and that it needed, felt that there was a need to change the habits of Americans. And again, it didn't really work, but we will cover that more at a later time. Moving on now to the issue of childhood. As we've talked about this issue of child labor, okay? And America, again, had two different types of visions. Basically, one, middle class wanted to see their children be in a condition like everybody did. Nice clothes, outdoors, enjoying something like a bike ride, right? Okay. But what were the conditions for many workers? It was a whole different story. I'm going to now have you watch this clip on Mother Jones. Let me see if it actually plays here, and if not, well, I'm actually just going to stop it here. I will put in this clip, and then we'll just do a discussion of this after.